and welcome to my GitCon talk. I am super excited to be here. A little bit sad though that we couldn't all meet in person, but it's really good that this is still happening, that we can still meet like this. I look forward to chatting you all in the chat as we're going, and also doing the Q&A live, which is going to be awesome. So let's jump into it. The title of my talk is using Git for the ultimate in teamwork. I'll introduce myself really briefly first before we get into all the juicy stuff. So I am Mish Manners. You'll find me on pretty much every social media platform known to man as Mish Manners. In the GitCon schedule, you'll see me as Michelle Mannering, but everyone calls me Mish. You'll find me on Twitter, tweeting about lots of different developer things, also tweeting about gaming, sometimes even what we're doing for the day. On Twitch, I will be doing lots of live streaming. Well, I am doing lots of live streaming, also doing some coding as well. I'm really excited. There is now a code and game developer category on Twitch, which is exciting for all of us. You will find me on LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, and of course on GitHub. I work on the developer relations team. I'm one of the developer advocates, and I'm coming to you from Melbourne, Australia. Yes, Australia does exist. Yes, we are here. And my internet is holding up just. So the things I'm going to cover for the talk today are a little bit on Git. Now, I know this is an advanced talk, so we're only going to cover this part very briefly. But the stuff I'm really excited about and really passionate about is the collaboration and the teamwork, which is what we're going to focus on through the lens of Git. And one of the things I'm going to talk about is Git commits. This is something I really love. And lots of people on my Twitch streams talk about this quite a lot. They comment on my Git commits a lot in a very positive light, which is good. We're going to talk about using Git in your team. And we're also going to talk about some examples, go through some demos while we're talking about how to use Git in your team. So just to recap again really briefly, Git is a distributed version control system. Hopefully you all know this by now, and assuming you all do because you're all here for GitCon, and if I haven't covered it, someone else has covered it today during the talks. So it was introduced in 2005. We know that it is a way to do history tracking and version control of different files and how a project changes over time. We know that a distributed version control system versus a local control system, or just a version control system, means that everyone has the same copy of the file, everyone has the same version, everyone has the same history. In a distributed version control system, and it's a party, we're all happy, everyone's resolved, there's no conflicts, it allows us to work together really well. Now, why do I talk about working together really well? Because one of the things I love is collaboration. So what's really cool about collaboration is it is nothing new. Now, as I mentioned, Git was introduced in 2005, and way before Git was introduced, people have been collaborating. We've been collaborating throughout the ages, and it is definitely not a new concept. And we know that part of collaboration, and one of the reasons why collaboration works so well, is because of teamwork. And the teamwork is key here. The teamwork works because ideas can't be successful, people can't be successful, products can't be successful, and services can't be successful if we don't work together as a team to ensure specific goals are met. So again, it's nothing new. Traditionally, we've been doing it for a very long time, but more and more recently, we've had to do this in a more digital fashion. We know that it's happening a lot more online with GitHub specifically, because I work for GitHub, obviously. We've been doing this for a very long time. Remote work is one of the things that we love. We have people all over the world working. You know, I'm here in Melbourne. My boss is in the US. I've got teammates in the UK and in India. So it's something we've been doing for a very long time. And now a lot more people are doing it online remotely because of this global pandemic that's happening, which you may have heard about. So one of the key aspects of this collaboration is communication and the teamwork. So if we don't do these things well, if we don't collaborate well, if we don't communicate well, we can't work well across these different time zones. We can't work well across our teams, and we can't ship really cool products to people all over the world. Something our CEO Nat says a lot is coding is a team sport. Now, I like this idea of team sport because not only do I play a lot of physical team sport, but I play team sport online with video gaming as well. Here's a photo of us playing Quidditch. Yes, I come to you from Australia, which is a place that exists. I also play a fictional game that exists in the world of Harry Potter, and I play it IRL. It's a really fun game, and I encourage you to check out YouTube videos if you haven't actually seen it. So whether you're playing a physical sport, or you're playing team sport, or you're playing online digitally, like playing a co-op game, video game, you'll know that teamwork is the key to winning. And teamwork isn't just important in sport, it's also important in a company. Now, if we have a look at a company sense, and again, I take a lot of the way that I work in a team, in a company, I take a lot of that from my sport as well. But if we know that in a company, there's lots of different teams in a company. Here's just 4 that I've picked out. We've got an engineering team, we've got a sales team, we've got a community team, we've got a management team. So we know that if these teams want to be successful, they should work together. They should work collaboratively across the organization to get to a specific goal. Now, if all these teams worked on their own little thing, the engineering team would go just build stuff because they can. The sales team would just go sell whatever, and it might not even be what the engineering team's building. The community people and the managers and the marketing people out there going, yeah, I've got this cool thing, check it out. And then it's not actually what they want. And the managers are sitting there going, what's actually happening? We don't know what's going on. To be successful, we need to work collaboratively. We need to work across our organization. We need to eliminate roadblocks from the start. And one of those roadblocks is how we work together. So if we think about this in a different light, so imagine if all these teams are now working together, developers will then build really good products that are informed by the marketing and the community people that are out there talking to the community. The sales people can then sell those really cool things, and the managers are really happy because we all make more money and we're all more successful and we all build better things, and everyone is happy overall because we've just made a better place and we got a better world. So it's really important that we work together across the whole team. Not one team off in their own little ship going towards their own little destination. We're all going towards the same place. And in the middle of this cross, in the middle of these different teams, in the middle of our remote work, is usually some sort of platform or thing that keeps us all together, that keeps us all bound. For us and for many developers, that thing in the middle is GitHub, but it can also be anything from, Slack to Zoom to Teams, and in this case, Git as well. And we're going to talk about Git specifically. But no matter what is in the middle here, all these concepts apply that we're talking about. All these things about collaborating, about sharing goals, about being a unified force and working towards something unifiedly, and I don't think that's a word, but working towards these things and building better products for people is something we need to work towards together. And this platform thing in the middle usually helps us get there. But it is not this platform that is the key, right? The culture and the communication, the collaboration, the teamwork, and that framework and that mindset is more important than the specific platform that sits in the middle here, which is why in some ways the platform doesn't matter. So whether you're using GitHub, Git, Slack, Zoom, Teams, whatever it happens to be, a lot of these concepts apply. But we're going to talk about Git specifically today because that's what we're just talking about. So no matter which platform you choose, communication is at the heart of what you do. It's very important. So we think back to teamwork and we think back to our sport. So think about a game that you've won, whether it's a sporting game. Think about a thing that you've won, whether it's something you won within your team, or think about an esport that you might have won. Your team did really well in League of Legends or Valorant or something. What was the one thing that you all did really well that was key to that success or that win? Most of you will probably answer communication. So teams that are really good at communication will perform better than those who don't. So for example, a cut rate team with, second rate skills, for example, but really good communication will nearly always beat a team that has really good skills but mediocre communication. So we want to keep this in mind for the rest of my presentation, and we'll come back to it towards the end and But right now we're going to go and switch gears a little bit and talk about Git and repos and history and all those kind of things. If you've been working with Git for a while, you'll probably recognize this diagram. So this is the flow of how a project works on, it says GitHub Flow, but this is how Git, we usually work within Git, right? So across the top, you have your main branch, which is your project that you're working on, whether it's, a specific platform, app, service, whatever it happens to be. So you got your main project up the top. And when you want to create a feature for that project or a new version, we create what's called a branch. We branch off our main or our core product. We work on features. We commit some changes. We submit a pull request or create a pull request. We discuss and collaborate those things. We work out if it's something we want. Work out if it doesn't break everything else in the background. Once we're all happy with it, we merge it back into our main branch, and then we'll usually delete that branch, right? So in order for these things here to work effectively, we need to make sure that our Git history, so these things that happen, these, save points within our project, we need to make sure these things are specific, timely, and understandable. So working with Git, there are a number of ways to view and alter our Git history. So one of the ways to do that is via Git Commands. So Git Commands are these that are used to view and alter your Git repo. You can make changes to the history, such as adding files to the history or to a commit point. You can add messages to your files, see the history of your project, the status of your project. As you make these changes, everyone else on the project can see who's making the changes. They know what you've done, what files you've changed, what changes are made within those files. They can see whatever messages you've added with those files. You can see the overall history of the project that you're working on. So it's really important when you're working on a project in a team, because this keeps everyone accountable. So you know exactly at what point in time, what points within the project, certain people have done certain things. You can see what everyone's working on. You can see where everything is at. So you can see the status of it. And when we're making these changes, it's really important to be meaningful. So here's some of the main commands that are used in Git. Now, as I mentioned, this is more of an advanced talk, so we're going to run through these relatively quickly because a lot of you will already know this. So the first lot of commands are the commands you use when you're starting out with Git. And the first one is git init, which is short for git initialize, which turns the existing directory into a Git repository or repo. Then we have git clone, which clones the Git repository to your local machine. We've got git config, which configures things for you, such as your username, your email, even the color of your commits on the command line, so you can distinguish yours. Then we have git status, which shows you the status of a Git repo and the status of an overall project. So if we have a look here, again, we can see how these are working. Please don't hate on me for being a Windows user. I like my Windows. And we can see how all these different Git commands are being used. So git initialize to start off the repo, git config, we can see all the different things we can use with that command. And git status shows me the status of the repo, what needs to be added, untracked changes and things like that. Next thing we have are the changes that you make to your Git repo. So the first one, which a lot of you will know and love, which is git add, which adds a file or files to the repo, which are ready to be committed. And then we have git commit, which actually commits the changes you've made. And then we can see how these work together. So git add, we know that the dot adds all the files that you've previously untracked, whereas you can add specific files. The dot adds them all. You can see we've added a message to our commit there as well. So git commit will, and then the -m, you can add a message to your commit. Next lot are our syncing commands. The first one is git remote, which allows you to view, create, and delete different connections to other repositories. Not sure why all these came up at once. I'm sorry for that. Then we have git fetch, which downloads all your Git history from the remote repo to your local repo. Git checkout allows you to switch to a particular branch that you're looking at. Then we have git pull, which pulls in all the changes from the cloud down to your local machine. Then we have git push, which pushes all the changes up to the remote or the cloud. Then we can see how these are working together. So we got our Git remote there, which tells us that we're on the origin branch. We can go Git fetch to see what hasn't been added to our local machine yet. We can use Git checkout to see which branch one we can see that's behind by 2 commits on this one. Git pull allows us to pull those 2 changes in. And then obviously if you've got changes you want to make, you can use Git push. The next set of commands we have are versions. So working and changing different versions. So the first one we've got is Git branch. Now obviously, as we mentioned back at the start, when you're working on a project, you will create a branch for that feature or that thing that you're working on in the project. So Git branch gives you a list of all the branches that are currently in that repo. Git merge allows you to merge those changes back in. So as we said, when we finished working on a feature and it's ready to go in to the main, we can merge that in. So we can see this here. So we're going to say Git branch and see all the changes. I only have one in this one, then we can merge it, but we're already up to date. So that's all good. Now, if we forget these changes or we forget some of these commands, if we've got a new developer working on the team, or we're starting to work cross-team with non-developers, we have a really, really cool Git cheat sheet for all these commands, all the main commands that will be used. As I said, this is really awesome if you've got a new developer coming on the team. It's really fun to give them. It's 2 pages long, and it's got most of the main commands that you use in Git. I remember when I first started with one of our marketing managers who also wasn't a developer by background, she had one of these taped to her desk, and it was really cool. So when we're working with Git, it's important when collaborating with people that we need to keep things really tidy. And I say tidy because, as we mentioned back at the start, we wanted to keep things, we want to keep our Git, we want to keep it very timely, we want to keep it very neat, we want to keep it very understandable. So if you want to work on a new feature, we know that we need to create the branch first. We know that once we work on that feature, once we collaborate with people, we talk about that we want to merge that back in as well and delete that branch. So there's a whole lot of different commands that we've talked about. A lot of you will know the commands that you know that you love and the ones that you like to use a lot. So there's one command in particular that I really want to focus on because of the title of this talk, and that is Git Commit. So as I mentioned, it's really important to have good commit history. So it's really important, firstly, that we have regular commits to our history, especially for big changes. So why is this important? So if we think back to a time where you've ever worked on a project or a feature and you're like, oh, we didn't like that, let's revert the changes. Or if you've ever been working on, or you've used a program and it's become unstable and they say revert back to previous changes or previous version. That's basically what your commit history is. So if you haven't made a commit in, a couple of months or even a week or even a couple of days, then your history of the file is going to be very, very difficult to go back to a previous version if something goes wrong, if something breaks, if you don't like a particular feature and you want to revert back. It's difficult to do that if you don't have regular commits. So your history shows you all the different versions or, they're like save points in the file, right? So you want to have regular save points in the file that you can jump back to if you ever need. Also, if you add a whole lot of new things in, I like to make a commit then. If I made a specific big thing where I'm like, I'm not sure if this will work or if it won't, or if I'll even want it, then I make sure to make a commit very specific to that change. So yeah, when you're committing to your Git repository, it's really important to be specific. Why is it important to be specific? Because if you think about all these different save points in the file, if they aren't understandable, you don't know what those save points are, it's going to be very difficult to go back to each one. So I like using Git on GitHub, and we'll come back to this in a little bit too. But let's have a look what a Git log looks like in GitHub if we don't have any custom commit messages. So if we just hit the commit button, or if you're working on the command line and you just write git commit and you don't put a message in, we'll see that it just looks like an absolute mess. Like there's a couple of things in here I can see I've updated social details, added social icons, and something about button spacing, but all the rest is literally just update whatever the file name is, which is the default on GitHub. So if I've made a mistake in any of these files, it's really hard to go back to what I've done here. So say if I've I don't like a specific color that I've put in, I can't see where I've made that change. The other thing is we can see all these commits were made around about the same time. So that's not useful either. I know that I don't understand this, and I know that this actually did happen to me. This one's for a dummy repo, so I wasn't working on a team, didn't have to put anyone through this pain. But there was a point where I was just clicking commit on everything. And I was like, oh, I really want to change back to a specific thing. And I was like, oh, how am I going to find it? I literally had to go through every single file, look at the changes in that file, look at the specific lines that have been changed, and try and revert back. So this kind of non-custom commit message could be akin or could be likened to really core communication, like sending an email with no content in it and literally just having a very blank, vague subject heading. So that's not really useful for anyone. But on the flip side, if we do have custom commit messages and we have really good commit messages, it looks a little bit more like this. So you can see this is sort of website that I was working on. We can see that it's much more understandable, much more clear where I'm making changes. So we can see I've made changes to Google Analytics. I've added an image in at some point. We've added some SEO. We've done some Twitter metadata and some social media data. So this is much easier to change, much easier to understand. And everyone else in the team knows what I've done. That's if I had a team for doing this on. I was working by myself for this project. But at least I know exactly what I've done. Now, if we have a look at some of my messages, we'll notice they have a little ellipsis next to them, which means there's even more information to that commit. So if we have a look at that, we can see this one. If I click the ellipsis, this tidy. Okay, what does tidy mean? Okay, if I look at the actual comment, I can see that it's clean up the code, remove dead spaces and unused pieces. So this is really, really good communication, and it's super useful if I want to go back. So say, for example, I've made this commit, this tidy up code, and then something all of a sudden breaks. And I'm like, oh, maybe I accidentally deleted something that I didn't want to delete. I can really easily go back to this and see, okay, that's where I removed unused pieces and dead spaces. And maybe let's go back to that and see if it fixes the problem. So when working in a team, it's really, really useful for your team to understand what is happening in this project. And it's really useful and even more important when working across teams, maybe even working with non-developers as well. That's one of the things I love about working on GitHub is non-developers work with it. So let's have a look at Git commits on GitHub. So GitHub is just one way to store and call on your Git repo and also collaborate on your repo. So they're currently over 65 million developers using GitHub and over 200 million repositories. So that is a lot of commit history to go through. And so one of the things I really like about it is all the various different ways I can interact with Git on GitHub. And one of those ways we're going to talk about is, and we're going to talk about all these different ways, and these aren't all specific to GitHub, but I will talk about one of them or two of them that are very specific to GitHub. Now, one of the reasons I like talking about this and I like talking about various different ways to work is because within your team, you're going to have different types of people, different types of developers, different personalities, maybe even non-developers too. And when working and developing code or different types of work, we know that everyone has their own preference to doing things. Some people like to use Windows, like me. Other people like to use Mac. Some people like to use Linux. So for GitHub, we don't like telling developers that they have to do something a specific way. So we allow developers to work in whatever way that they prefer most. So let's look at all the different ways that you can interact with Git on GitHub. First one is non-GitHub specific, and that's what we've already been talking about, which is the command line. So those Git commands that we talked about, you use them all in the terminal, use them in the command line. We know developers love the command line, and making commit messages on the command line is second nature to a lot of developers. But don't forget, when you make those commit messages on the command line, it's still useful to be really, not even useful, it's still important to be very specific. Don't just write your name or, leave it blank or write, an M for Mish. Make sure you're being specific about what you're committing to your history. Something that not a lot of developers know, because I just did a video on it a couple of weeks ago and people were commenting like, whoa, that's so cool, I had no idea, is that you can use and write multiple commit messages on the command line. So if you think back to where I showed you the GitHub commit message and you could use the ellipsis to expand it and see more, you can obviously write that on GitHub with the text area and the description area for the commit that you're making. You can do the same thing on the terminal. All you do is use the -M command multiple times. So if you write it here, for example, the first one will be like the title, so update code readme. And then if I write another line, I can write more information about what the commit is. So here, like add new examples, updated contribution guide. And if I commit that, you'll see, and I'll push it up and I use the git log to see the status. You'll see that some of my commits have multiple lines in them. And you can do that by using those multiple M dashes. So you can see it right here. We got basically like a title and then almost like a paragraph, which is really useful. The next way to do commits, so you got a little bit of a preview about it, is GitHub web, so github.com. So the first one is if you're making, like I use this when I'm making a quick fix and I'm just on the web. So if you've used this, if you use GitHub on the web, you'll notice that there are the commit buttons down here. Don't just click commit changes because it'll just be update file, whatever, it'll be update whatever your file name is. And if you just add like a one line or just the title, it can be okay, but sometimes you want to leave a little bit more information about what you've done in the commit. So I try, and when I'm writing a commit message, I try and actually fill them up. So I have basically a title and then a description about what the commit is. You can pretty much do the same on GitHub Desktop as well. So it looks almost the same as the web interface, this little part here. And this is something I really like as a person who comes from a non-developer background. Sure, I did science and did some coding at uni, but overall it was really a chemistry major. And so I did a lot more coding when I came to GitHub. So I like using the desktop as a non-developer background. And I know lots of people who are using GitHub who aren't developers like using the desktop too. And one of the reasons I like using it is because if I write this commit message here and put it in the description, not only can I see the changes that I'm making in GitHub Desktop, but when I commit this to main using the big blue button, it'll show me, I'm typing really slow there, but if I use this and go commit to main, it'll have this big blue button saying, hey, you're one commit behind. Do you want to push to origin? So I really love using desktop for that reset, that purpose. The UI is just really nice. So if you've got people on your team who have just coming into your team, either they're new developers or you might be getting other people from across the organization to join you and understand what you do, often working GitHub Desktop can be a really good way to do it. So whichever way you choose to work, whether it's the CLI, the desktop or the web interface, it's really important to remember and think back to what we're saying at the start, which is that collaboration and teamwork, right? So this is all about teamwork. Now, I often with my talks, I try and squish in or slide in a Lego or a Star Wars reference. This time I managed to fit 2 in, which is awesome. So these are stormtroopers. They're talking to Darth Vader about their latest commit to the Death Star. And if they don't write a really good commit with some nice description, Vader is going to crush them with the Force. Now, if you don't write a good commit message, you're not going to get crushed with the Force, but your team might shun you because they don't know what you're doing. So basically, this all comes down to teamwork, right? Teamwork, communication, and collaboration. So we know that teams work together, or the teams that work together and collaborate well and communicate better are the ones who win. You win the customer, you win the harder developer, you win the next sale, you win the next job, you win whatever that is you're trying to win, you win. Because if you make it easy for your team to understand what you're doing, what everyone's working on, everyone is on the same page. You can work much better, you can work much more effectively, and you can work much faster as well. And ultimately, you build better products and services for your customers. So I want you, as we wrap up for this talk, I want to challenge you. And the challenge is this. Next time you make a commit, whether it's on the command line, the web, or the app, think to yourself, is this a good commit message? Will my team understand what I've done? Will I understand what I've done if I look back at it? Can everyone in my team, including non-developers, understand what I've done? Am I being a good team player? And am I communicating well? If we do these things correctly, we do them well, we will all make the world a better place, one commit at a time. So with that comes to the end of my talk. I will open it up for questions. Looking forward to chatting with you all live in the live Q&A. Now, if I don't get to your question or you're watching this on rewatch or on demand, feel free to connect with me on any of the social media platforms. Ask me a question. I'm always available to answer, and I'm really looking forward to chatting with you all and connecting with you all. So I hope my talk was really insightful, and please stay safe and well, everyone, and I'll see you all in the chat. Thank you all.
All right. Michelle Mannering, thank you so much. Good morning. Good morning to you over there in Australia.
Good afternoon, evening, is it there?
Yeah, just afternoon, evening on our side over here. I love saying good morning, so I was delighted to find out what time it was over there in Australia.
Yay.
Well, thanks so much for joining us during our live Q&A session. We did have some questions from the Discord that I thought to put together for you. So we have a few here. So the first one, looks like there was a slide about GitHub Flow. Yep. And we're curious as to know what are some of the advantages of using GitHub Flow versus, say, like Git Flow or GitLab Flow or any other alternative method there?
Yeah, sure. So for GitHub, we just have so many really cool things that you can use to collaborate on your code. So if you have some non-developers who come to your team, or you might have used GitHub for the first time, or you're even coming to develop for the first time. So for me, when I first heard GitHub, I was like, that's that thing that hosts code, right? And a lot of people who are coming to it for the first time will think GitHub is that place where you just host your code or literally just host your repository. It's so much more than that. So obviously today we only went through like the Git side of it. So committing your messages and things like that. But there's so many other things you can do on GitHub which allow you to collaborate and communicate. So for example, we have things like issues, which allow you to open an issue. You can then link to a piece of code or pull request or a commit message that you've made or a commit that you've made. And you can then start talking about that in a collaborative manner. And you can do it on the same platform. Previously, before we had any of those features on GitHub, people would collaborate off platforms. So they would collaborate in things like, back then, I don't even think Slack was available back then. So they would collaborate in things like Teams. They might have Discord, emails as well. Like emails are a big thing that would get sent around. So having all those collaboration features like issues, we now have GitHub discussions, which allow you to have these forum style conversations about feature upgrades that you might be working on, and new things, connect to your community, things like that. Having all those things live alongside your code and being able to link to them and talk about them in a very collaborative manner is one of the main benefits there, one of the main advantages there. And it's one of the main reasons why so many people are using GitHub, which is really exciting. Like I mentioned, there's over 65 million people using GitHub now, which is really cool. Over 200 million repositories, which is really cool. There's some new features coming, which will be made more widely available to people, more collaboration, more ways to do things really cool. So if that entices you, please go and follow GitHub on the Twitter channels and the YouTubes, because we're making lots of announcements there. So keep your eyes out.
Good teaser.
Yeah, good teaser. If you haven't heard, 2 universes coming up in literally about a month. So I think 22nd or 23rd of October. That's when we make all our announcements, and there's some really cool new announcements that are coming around collaboration and some of the things that we kind of touched on today. So yeah,
a lot of our team members have gone to Universe over the years. I've always enjoyed the big art installations that, at least in the ones that were hosted in San Francisco, a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was really exciting. I got to go back in 2019. It was really
Nice.
cool, big vibe, like it's huge. And it was the first time, because at the same time as Universe, I went to a few other conferences in the US. As I mentioned, I'm from Australia, and our conferences here are just not that giant. Like, I was just blown away by the scale of conferences over there. It's really cool. So hopefully when things do go back IRL, hopefully we can all see each other IRL at a Universe or a GitCon at some point, right?
Oh yeah, 100%. Next question we have. So during your talk, you mentioned one of the core actions that the foundation to having a conversation over a pull request or even over issues is the commit. I'm just curious, how often would you recommend users commit? Is there any rule of thumb that you like to follow or best practice you recommend?
Yeah, sure. So there's no specific rule of thumb. It sort of comes down to what you decide in your team is a good time frame. Like, I know some teams have, like, every 3 or 4 hours you make a commit. So mine's not so much a time thing, but more of a how much have you done thing. So like if you make a whole lot of changes or you make a block of changes to something specific, that's a really good time to save and make a commit.
Yeah.
You can obviously say or commit more often, but again, you got to come back to thinking like, okay, if I look at this in a log, what's it going to look like? Is this going to be too much and we're committing too many small changes that we're then like, okay, this commit has literally just deletion of a blank line. The next commit is adding a dot. The next commit is adding the word add. And then the next commit is the. So obviously you don't want to be committing like every single little thing you do, but you want to be making enough commits that you can jump back to that point in time. So say if you've added, like I mentioned, if you're working on a website and you change the color, that would be a good spot to commit. So you say, commit, change color from yellow to blue, and then that way you can always go back to that if you need. So it's not so much you have to make a commit every X hours or every X lines of code. It sort of becomes more around, how often do you want to save? Think about like in terms of like saving a file. How often do you want that file to be saved with a commit? With a post-it note to it. Like, think about if you were, working on, say, a slideshow, for example, not just saving the file, because obviously, you obviously hit Control S all the time. So don't think about it in that sense. But think about if you were making changes to a file, how often would you be sending that file to your team if you had to physically send the file to the team? Like, hey, I added in a new slide. Would you send the file then? If you changed all the colors, would you send the file? If you added a breaking feature, would you send a file to people? So think about it in a few different ways like that. I hope that kind of makes sense, but there's no real rule of thumb. And that goes for a lot of things we do on, that people do on GitHub. People say, well, how often should I talk to my community on discussions? Well, how big is your community? How many people do you have? How does your community like to communicate? Everyone's slightly different. So talk about it within your team. Think about what your team would like as best practices and then go for that. And, feel free to try some things out too. Like, let's try making more commit messages, or maybe we have made way too many commit messages and it is a bit messy. Let's try cleaning it up a little bit. So feel free to try to.
It's good to go back to basics. I know commits are the foundational piece, but it's good to ask those questions and maybe rethink something that could affect the rest of the workflow. Related to commits, we had another question. So any recommendation for great commit messages? I think it's a good practice to use prefixes and they have an example here.
I can see the example. That's a really good one. So when I say I get lots of really good commit, I get lots of really good comments about my commit messages. So I'm often doing a lot of live coding on Twitch. And when I do so, I'm there and I'm making changes, I'm making commit messages, and people often like, these are really good commit messages, Mitch. And I'm like, oh, really? You like? Cool. So some of the things I do, again, this comes back to best practice in your team. Like, you might decide, that format that is an example is a really good format for your team. Again, it's like saving a file name, right? Different companies, organizations have different file name conventions. So again, talk about it in your team, but just think about like being descriptive and being, if somebody goes back and looks at it, is it understandable? So that, refactor made some project change structures, it might be good. And then in the additional comments, you might just like really quickly list what those project change structures are. So mine are often, commit, I'm just trying to think of a good one that I did recently, but maybe it is a color change, right? Color change. And I might say in the comments, change from blue or from yellow to blue based on community feedback or something like that, right? So again, it comes down to what do you want to show within the rest of your team? Or if it's an open source project, if other people come to the project, are they going to know what you've done?
Yeah.
And does that seem useful? So I think it's specific to each individual, but again, just think, is it understandable? So that you've written there, like the fix change, I can see what you've fixed and changed, and some of the your release notes and your change log, some of those will come from your commit messages. So think about if you were to just click create or generate change log from all the commit messages I've made, is that going to be an okay change log without too many tweaks and changes? So think about from that point of view as well.
Well said. And then one last question from we have one more question from the Discord. There we go. So I've seen that on GitHub has draft PRs. Any recommendations on how to use them?
Oh, I like this one because I was literally doing draft PRs the other day. So this one's really good if you are, thinking about, okay, how do I, I'm making all these changes, but I'm not sure if we should actually make a pull request right this second, or if it needs some additional changes. So having a draft PR there can really help, like, hey, I've drafted up this PR. Here's some of the changes I've made. Can you go and have a look at it? Get someone else in your team to have a look at it first before you actually, hit the pull request on there. Because often, like, once you've hit make a pull request, it's the request has been made, and then you can collaborate on the changes, right? But if you write a draft and say, like, it's basically saying to someone, like, I'm not sure if this is ready to be made into a pull request, but I would like to talk about it and collaborate on it, from their own point of view. So kind of like the same, I come back to like these ideas of like, making files or whatever. So if you had like a draft PowerPoint, right, and you sent it to me, it's saying to me that like it could be finished and this could be the final version, but I want to, talk about it. I want to look at it before we hit save and send it to GitCon for my talk, right? In the same way that you can do draft PRs on GitHub, like, this is the code that I've currently got, but I'd like to talk about it and collaborate it first. So another great feature that we have available on GitHub, which is really cool if you're using it.
It seems like it lowers the stakes, which I think helps the conversation flow a little bit more easily. So
yeah, definitely. And it helps maintainers too. So it's like not like, oh, look, another pull request that's come through that's incomplete. Right. It's like, okay, well, this person's asking for help on this, and I can now see what they're trying to do. And it's a really good way to collaborate.
Well, in the final minute here, any final thoughts that you wish to share before we adjourn this session?
No, just, thank you all so much for coming. The questions are great. If you didn't get your question answered, like I said, or you're watching this back on YouTube or after the fact, feel free to, contact me on any of the social media platforms. I can't promise that I can respond to you straight away, but I'll try my best. Actually, the best one to catch me on is Twitch. Okay, so we were streaming on Monday, literally this Monday night just gone. We were streaming Fortnite, and someone came in and was like, hey, Mish, I know it's after work hours and you're playing Fortnite, but is it okay if I ask GitHub related questions? I'm like, yeah, sure. This is the reason I stream. So we full on dove into a conversation around, GitHub and Azure Flow and the definition of DevSecOps and creating really good documentation for developers. And someone was like, yeah, I'm having trouble making documentation. And we're like, yeah, you can't assume anything, and, get rid of stuff like simple and easy and use instead things like lightweight to describe a program. So it was really exciting and really interesting. And that is not a standalone. Like that happens pretty much every time I stream. So feel free to jump in and ask questions. And as I mentioned, GitHub Universe is coming up in just on a month. So head over to githubuniverse.com. We're asking people to sign up and register this year. So it's going to be really exciting. There's going to be some really cool things you can do once you register. And it's going to be really awesome. And as I said, there's some really cool new features coming. So keep an eye out.
All right. We're going to keep that energy up from one conference to the next. All right. Well, thanks so much, Mish. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us for the live Q&A.
And thank you all so much for having me at GitCon. I really enjoyed this.